On Wednesday, the 18th of March 2009, a 35-year-old woman called Claudia Lawrence finished her shift at the University of York, where she worked as a chef. Her day started early, at around 6 a.m, and by 2 o'clock that afternoon, her shift was over. She left the university and made her way home. She was seen near her house in Heworth, and later on that evening, she spoke to both her parents on the phone. Nothing about that day appeared unusual. She was at home. She was making calls, she was texting. She was planning for the next morning. You see, her car was currently being repaired, so the following day she knew that she would have to walk to work, which meant she would need to leave her house right before dawn. A quiet walk through York, roughly 3 miles long, in the dark. But Claudia never arrived. She didn't call in sick, she didn't turn up late. She didn't send a message to explain where she was. She simply failed to appear. And when people finally entered her home, the house gave them a picture that was almost normal. Her handbag, purse, bank cards, and passport were still there. The bed had been made, and there were dishes in the sink. But Claudia was gone. Her phone was missing, along with her work rucksack and her hair straighteners. Her mobile phone stayed active for hours after she should have arrived for her shift. Then just after midday, it was switched off. Not answered, not found, switched off. Some time later, police would release CCTV of a man close to the alleyway behind Claudia's home. A man seen near her house the night before she vanished, and apparently seen again the following morning. A man police couldn't identify. That is the center of Claudia Lawrence's disappearance. A normal evening, an early shift, a house that held back more than it revealed, a phone that stayed local then went silent, a route to work she may or may not have walked, and a group of people somewhere that police believe knew more than they were saying. So did Claudia leave her house that morning? Was she intercepted on her way to work? Did she meet someone she knew? Was the answer hidden in her private life? Or was one of the most important clues captured on CCTV walking near her home and then lost in a blur of grainy images? But there's one question that's followed her family for more than 17 years. What happened between Claudia's final phone call home and the shift she never reached? Before we go any further, if you enjoy true crime, paranormal, and the outright unexplainable, you're in the right place. Go ahead and give that like button a big old click. It's the best way to support the channel. Now, this is the baffling case of Claudia Lawrence, the woman who left behind almost everything except answers. Claudia Elizabeth Lawrence was born on the 27th of February 1974 in Malton, North Yorkshire. She grew up with her mother Joan, her father Peter, and her older sister Ali. Her father was a solicitor and her mother served as the mayor of Malton. Claudia went to York College for Girls and later trained in catering. By 2009, she was living in Heworth, York, in a terraced cottage she'd bought 2 years earlier. She was 35 years old. She had a job, a home, friends, a social life, a local pub, a routine. And that routine is important because Claudia worked as a chef at the University of York. Her work meant early mornings. Not the kind of early where you hit snooze a few times and drift into the day. Proper early. The kind where you leave the house while the streets are still quiet. The kind where being reliable matters. And Claudia was known as reliable. She was expected at work. When she had a shift, people expected her to be there. And that's one of the first reasons that her disappearance felt so wrong. Because this wasn't someone casually missing an appointment. This wasn't someone known for being unreliable and failing to arrive for work. This was someone that people could trust, that just didn't appear. Claudia's house on Heworth Road was around 3 miles from the university. Normally she could drive, but at the time her car was being repaired, which meant that she had to walk. That one routine change, that one break in the normal, changes everything. Because if Claudia's car had been available, the timeline might have looked different. It could well have changed the course of history, because without the car, Claudia's morning depended on a walk through York before 6 a.m. A long enough walk for something to happen. A quiet enough time for fewer people to notice. And a familiar enough route that someone who knew her routine may have known where she would be. Claudia was social. She was known locally. She spent time at the Nag's Head pub close to her home. She had friendships and relationships that police later examined closely. Now, this part of the story needs care. Because after Claudia disappeared, parts of her private life became public. There were stories about relationships with men, married men. There were reports of secrecy. There were reports of rumors. And some of that became central to how the case was discussed. But Claudia wasn't a rumor. She wasn't a headline. She wasn't a puzzle piece for strangers to judge. She was a daughter whose parents wanted her home. She was a sister, a friend, a woman who had built a life. So when we talk about her private life, the point isn't to sensationalize it. The point is to understand why police looked there. Investigators believed the answers might sit close to Claudia, close to her social circle, close to people who knew her, close to someone familiar with her habits. And that's what makes this case feel different from a stranger's abduction, because when a stranger takes someone, the mystery often begins with distance. Who was this unknown person? Where did they come from? How did they cross paths? But with Claudia, police repeatedly pointed towards familiarity. Someone local, someone known, someone who may have understood her movements, someone who may have watched the investigation unfold while staying quiet. And that's why the silence around this feels so heavy. To see how narrow that gap really is, we need to go back to the day that Claudia went missing. Wednesday, the 18th of March, 2009. Claudia started work around 6 a.m. at Goodrick College. Her shift ended at around 2 p.m. and a few minutes later, CCTV recorded her leaving the college on foot. She left work and began her journey back towards Heworth. Her car was being repaired, so walking had become part of the routine. But according to a later timeline, a colleague saw her on the way home, stopped her car and gave her a lift, supposedly dropping her off outside her house. A short time later, Claudia appears to have gone back out locally. At around 3:05 p.m, she was seen near Heworth Road and East Parade, walking back towards her home. So by mid-afternoon, the timeline still makes sense. She'd gone to work, she'd finished her shift, she'd gone back towards home. There was no public sign that anything was wrong. That evening, Claudia spoke to her father, Peter. She also spoke to her mother, Joan. Both said she seemed in good spirits. She spoke about Mother's Day, which was coming up very soon. She also mentioned that she was going to bed early because her next shift started at 6 a.m. And because her car was being repaired, she'd need to get up really early, well before 5, and walk to work. That conversation gave the evening shape. Claudia wasn't talking like someone who was about to vanish. She was talking about someone thinking about tomorrow. Her early night, her early start, her walk to work. Then came her final known messages. At 8:23 p.m, Claudia sent a text message to a friend. And at 9:12 p.m, another text arrived at her phone. But publicly, the wording of these messages has never been released. And because Claudia's phone has never been found, it isn't known whether she ever read that final incoming message. After that, there were no confirmed contacts with Claudia. Just the beginning of a blank space. And that blank space is right at the heart of this case. Investigators had to work out whether Claudia had disappeared that night or the following morning. So from this point on, every clue seems to point in two different directions at once. If something happened on Wednesday night, then the focus shifts towards her house. Did someone come in? Did Claudia let someone in? Did she leave to meet someone? Was she expecting them? But if something happened on Thursday morning, the focus shifts outside. The front door, the alleyway, the route to work, the streets between Heworth and the university, a person waiting, a car stopping, a familiar face in the dark. Both possibilities are disturbing. Both leave major gaps, and neither has ever led to Claudia being found. Thursday, the 19th of March, the following day, Claudia was due at work at 6 a.m. To get there on time, she'd have to leave early, probably around 5 a.m. The city would have been quiet. Fewer people, fewer cars, fewer witnesses. If something happened on that walk, it happened in the kind of darkness where details disappear. But Claudia didn't arrive. Her manager called her mobile phone. The phone rang and went to voicemail. At this point, her phone was still active. Someone could call it. It hadn't vanished from the network. It hadn't gone permanently dead. But Claudia didn't answer, and she didn't call back. Now, at first, the alarm wasn't immediate. That feels painful now, but in the moment, people still had to weigh up ordinary explanations. Maybe she'd overslept. She could have been unwell. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd turn up later and explain. But that day kept moving, and Claudia stayed silent. That evening, she was supposed to meet her friend Susie Cooper at the Nag's Head pub, which is what people stipulate was the last text message conversation that she had that evening, but that's unconfirmed. The Nag's Head was a local pub close to Claudia's home. It was part of her social world, but Claudia didn't show up. Susie tried to call her, but there was no answer. Now, Susie found that odd because Claudia used her phone a lot. People expected Claudia to respond. If plans changed, she'd normally say something. If she was late, there would be a message. But again, there was nothing. No call, no text, no apology, no explanation. By Friday, the 20th of March, concern had grown. Susie tried to reach Claudia again, but still nothing. She then began contacting other people, including a chap called George, who was the landlord for the Nag's Head pub. Eventually, Claudia's father Peter was told that something was wrong. Peter called Claudia's workplace. That is when he learned that Claudia hadn't shown up for a shift on Thursday. She also hadn't shown up for a shift on Friday either. 2 missed shifts and 2 days of silence. For a reliable person, that wasn't normal. Peter had a key to Claudia's house, and he went there and asked George, the landlord of the Nag's Head pub, to accompany him. Inside, there was no obvious signs of chaos, no clear sign of a violent struggle. The house was orderly. The bed was made, there were unwashed dishes in the kitchen sink, suggesting Claudia may have eaten breakfast. Her handbag was in the house, and inside was her purse, her bank cards, and her passport. Those are the things that most people take if they're trying to leave to start another life. Money, identification, a way to travel, a way to survive. But Claudia had left them behind. So the house argued against one of the theories. It didn't look like a woman leaving voluntarily. It looked like a woman whose life had been interrupted. But other things were missing. Her phone, her blue and grey Caramel rucksack, which she used to carry her chef's whites, and her hair straighteners. Those missing items create quite a strange tension in the case. The rucksack points towards work. If Claudia took it, that suggests that she may have been prepared for her shift. The phone also makes sense. If she leaves home, most people take their phones with them. But the hair straighteners are harder to explain. Were they packed into the rucksack? Did Claudia take them herself? Did someone else remove them? Did they even matter? Or have they just become significant because almost everything else was still there? The house gave investigators a scene that looked almost ordinary, but not ordinary enough. A woman's life was still inside. Claudia's mobile phone was a silver Samsung D900. To this day, it has still never been found. Police later established that it remained active until the morning of Thursday the 19th, and at around 12:10 p.m. it was deliberately switched off. That detail pushes this case into darker territory. It suggests action, not just a battery fading away, but a decision. Someone, somewhere, making Claudia's phone stop speaking. Someone pressing a button. Someone ending the last electronic trace of Claudia Lawrence. And the timing is unsettling. By 12:10 p.m., Claudia had already missed her 6 a.m. shift. A manager had already tried to call. People were already starting to wonder where she was, yet her phone was still there in the background, active, reachable, and then suddenly silent. So the question becomes direct. Who switched Claudia's phone off? Was it Claudia? Or was it the person who knew she'd never answer it again? By around 2 p.m. on Friday the 20th of March, Claudia was reported missing to the North Yorkshire Police. At first, the case was treated as a missing person inquiry because at the beginning, there was no confirmed crime scene, no body, no visible violence in the house, and Claudia wasn't initially classed as vulnerable. Police had to consider whether or not she had left voluntarily, but Claudia's family strongly believed that something had happened to her. And as the days passed, that belief became harder to dismiss. Claudia didn't come home, she didn't contact her parents, she didn't access her bank cards, she didn't use her passport, she didn't reappear. And 5 weeks after she vanished, North Yorkshire Police began treating the case as suspected murder. By then, the missing person case had become something else. A suspected murder without a body. A timeline without a final sighting, a house without an obvious crime scene, and a phone that seemed to know more than anyone else could prove. The first problem for police was simple. There wasn't one clear place to begin. If something bad had happened inside her house, then the house should have told the story, but there was no obvious trace of violence. If she'd been taken on her walk to work, the route should have produced something. A witness, a camera, a dropped item, but searches didn't find her. If she'd left voluntarily, her passport, purse, and bank cards shouldn't have been sitting at home, but they were. So every explanation had a problem, and every problem opened another question. Police checked Claudia's route to work. One of the most important cameras was Melrose Gate Post Office. That camera was on her most direct route, but the footage from the morning of the 19th didn't show Claudia passing. Now, that doesn't absolutely prove that she didn't walk to work. She may have used another route, she might have passed outside the frame, she may have left earlier than expected. But it removed one of the clearest chances to confirm her movements that morning. The camera that should have helped didn't answer the question. And without that answer, the timeline split again. Maybe Claudia left and took another route. Maybe she never reached that point. Maybe she never left the house in the way people assumed. Maybe the missing rucksack and phone suggested a work journey that never really happened. Police explored different theories. One was that Claudia had left by choice, but over time that became harder to support. The things that she left behind suggested against that. Another theory was an accident. A fall, a medical emergency. Something happened on the way to work. But the searches around the route in the local area failed to find anything. There was no body, no clothing, rucksack, no phone. There was no sign that Claudia had collapsed somewhere between home and work. Another possibility was a stranger. Someone passing through, someone looking for an opportunity. A chance encounter in the darkness. But police increasingly focused on a different idea. Claudia may have known the person responsible. That theory came to shape the case. The lack of clear public abduction, the local nature of the phone activity, the timing, her routine, the possibility that someone knew that she'd be walking to work before dawn, and the repeated police belief that people close to the case knew or suspected more than they had told investigators. That belief became one of the defining features of the investigation. Police weren't only searching for Claudia, they were trying to break the silence. A silence around friendships, a silence around relationships, a silence around people who may have heard things, seen things, or known things and didn't fully share them. This is where Claudia's private life entered the case. Police looked at the men she knew. They examined her relationships. They tried to understand whether jealousy, secrecy, or personal connection could explain what happened. But there's a line here. A line between investigation and judgment. Claudia's personal life may have mattered to the police, but it shouldn't become a way to blame her. Whatever happened, Claudia was a victim. Her private choices didn't make her disappearance any less tragic. They didn't make her less deserving of care. They didn't make the silence around the case easier to accept. The only fair question is this: did someone in Claudia's private life know more than they said? It was understood that Claudia's encounters with various gentlemen, whether those gentlemen were married or in other relationships, became very sensationalized. It's clear through the information that we have available to us that Claudia wasn't monogamous. And quite frankly, who cares? All right? Leave that alone. Her private life is her private life. The problem I have with it is that if on the evening before she disappeared, or if she did disappear the previous evening, if she happened to be meeting with one of the gentlemen that was married or in another relationship, and they have crucial information, the fact that they are holding it back to save their own skin, to not get themselves in trouble, that is painful. There is a very strong chance that someone knows so much more than they are letting on, but they won't say anything because then they'll be in the public eye and effectively they'll have to explain themselves to their wife. So if that is the case, grow up. As the investigation grew, the scale became enormous. Police took thousands of statements. They searched areas around York, they examined CCTV, they looked at phone records, they pursued leads in Yorkshire, elsewhere in the UK and overseas. They considered links to Cyprus, where Claudia had holidayed and had connections. Now, depending on what you read and where you read it, there are also sources that state that Claudia was considering moving out to Cyprus. I've not particularly dug down that line of inquiry because I want to try and focus on the disappearance itself, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. They investigated reports of suspicious people and vehicles in the Heworth area. They searched around her home and the route to work, but Claudia still wasn't found. The case kept producing possibilities, but not proof. Then, in 2013, the investigation entered a new phase. A major review began. A fresh team went back through the case. Claudia's home on Heworth Road was examined again. Forensic work was revisited. Old material was reviewed using newer techniques. CCTV was re-examined, phone evidence was reconsidered, and the review looked for missing links. Not because the original timeline suddenly changed, but because cold cases can shift when old evidence is placed under a new light. And one of the most important pieces to emerge involved the alleyway behind Claudia's home. In 2015, police released CCTV footage of an unidentified man seen near Claudia's house at around 7:15 p.m. on Wednesday the 18th of March. That was roughly an hour before Claudia spoke to her parents. Then, police found additional footage from the same camera that appeared to show the same man in the same place the following morning, around the period when Claudia may have been leaving for work. That man became one of the most important people police wanted to trace. Not because police proved that he had harmed Claudia, not because the footage solved the case, but because his presence near her home at those times mattered. Police had experts examine the footage, but the camera quality limited what could be done. The image couldn't be sharpened into certainty, the man couldn't be identified, and despite appeals, he didn't come forward. That leaves a hard question. Was he simply someone local moving through that area as part of his own routine? Or was he connected to Claudia's disappearance? There may be an innocent explanation, but if there is, police still needed to hear it. Because until he's identified, he remains one of the case's biggest unresolved figures. The review also looked at vehicles. One piece of attention went to a silver Ford Focus seen on Heworth Road. Another involved an Astra van reportedly seen near Claudia's home on the night she disappeared. In a case with so little hard evidence, the vehicles became important. A car stopping, brake lights, a van near the house, a movement that could be normal or part of something else entirely. This is the difficulty with Claudia's case. So many details sit on the edge. They might be innocent, they might be crucial. And without the missing pieces, you can't always tell which is which. Now, the review did lead to some arrests. In May 2014, a 59-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of Claudia's murder. He was later released on bail. In July 2014, a 46-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. He was later released without charge. In 2015, 4 local men were arrested on suspicion of murder. A file was sent to the Crown Prosecution Service, but in 2016, police confirmed that the CPS decision was that the 4 men were not to be charged. All of that created another painful pattern. Arrest, hope, public attention, and then nothing. For a viewer, an arrest can feel like the story is finally moving, but for the family, it can feel like the answer is close. But when the charges don't follow, the case drops back into uncertainty. Not innocence declared by a solved case. Not guilt proven in court. Just another road that didn't bring Claudia home. North Yorkshire Police later said that the lack of data, CCTV, and other evidence from the time had frustrated the review. And that's something a lot of people overlook when they're reading about this case. Because 2009 feels recent. It feels like there should have been more. But Claudia didn't have a smartphone. She didn't have the kind of constant digital trail that people leave now. There was no GPS location history, no social media footprint in the modern sense. There was no Ring doorbell cameras on every other house. No easy way to reconstruct every single step. Her phone could tell the investigators something, but not enough. CCTV could show something, but clearly not enough. Witnesses could remember things, but nowhere near enough. The gap between modern expectation and 2009 reality gave the case the room it needed to stay unresolved. Police also said that there was no identified crime scene. Now that's a huge problem in a suspected murder case. A body can tell investigators where violence may have happened. A scene can show movement, blood, fibers, damage, a struggle, a cause of death. But with Claudia, there was no body and no confirmed scene. Without those, the investigators were trying to prove a story, but with missing pages. And that might have been why the silence of others became so central. If forensic evidence couldn't finish the case, testimony might. Someone saying what they saw. Someone admitting what they knew. Someone finally deciding that loyalty, fear, shame, or self-protection had gone on for too long. In 2017, after the review, the investigation moved into what police called a reactive phase. Now that sounds final, but it's not the same as being closed. It means that new information is assessed, and if something meaningful comes in, it can still be pursued. And police have continued to act on information. In 2021, they searched sand hut and gravel pits around 8 miles northeast of York. It was a major search. Specialist search teams were involved, dogs, divers, forensic archaeologists, and it lasted for about 2 weeks. Police said the information had pointed them towards the area and they couldn't ignore it. But when the search ended, nothing of obvious significance had been found. And that's another rhythm in Claudia's case. A lead emerges, a search begins, the public watches, the family waits, and then the answers slips away again. Claudia's disappearance also changed the law. Her father, Peter Lawrence, campaigned for families of missing people. Because when someone vanishes, families aren't only left with grief, they're left with practical problems. Bills, property, bank accounts, mortgages, insurance, legal affairs. The missing person's life keeps producing responsibilities, but the person who can manage them is gone. Out of that campaign came the Guardianship Missing Persons Act 2017, often referred to as Claudia's Law. It created a way for families to manage the affairs of a missing person after they'd been missing for a set period of time. Now, it didn't answer what happened to Claudia. It didn't give Peter, her father, the ending that he wanted, but it helped other families that are trapped in the same legal limbo. Peter Lawrence died in 2021. He died without knowing what happened to his daughter, which quite honestly makes me feel quite sad. He spent years appealing, campaigning, speaking, hoping and waiting. And the answer never came. In 2026, North Yorkshire Police marked 17 years since Claudia disappeared. They said they still believed the answers Claudia's loved ones deserve would come from people who know, or think they know, what happened. That is where the investigation sits today. Not forgotten, not solved, not closed. Waiting for information. Waiting for someone to speak. Waiting for the missing piece that turns suspicion into proof. Claudia Lawrence disappeared from a narrow space of time. And that is what makes this so unsettling. On Wednesday afternoon, she was seen walking home. On Wednesday evening, she spoke to her parents. She sounded normal. She had plans for Mother's Day. She was preparing for an early shift. But by Thursday morning, she was gone. There were no dramatic final images, no confirmation, no known crime scene, no body, and no conviction. Just a house that looked almost normal. A phone that rang, then vanished from the world. A route to work that should have produced answers, but didn't. A mysterious man who police still want to identify. And a silence that has lasted for years. There are only so many broad possibilities. Maybe Claudia left her house that morning and met someone on the way. Maybe she never made it that far. Maybe someone came to her home. Maybe she got in a vehicle. Maybe she was with someone she trusted. Maybe the answer was known from the beginning by people who chose to say nothing. But what we know is this. Claudia Lawrence was 35 years old. She worked as a chef at the University of York. She was last seen and heard from on the 18th of March 2009. She failed to arrive for work the next morning. Her phone, rucksack, and hair straighteners disappeared with her. Yet her purse, bank cards, and passport were left behind. Police later treated the case as a suspected murder. and several people were arrested over the years, but no one was charged with her murder, and Claudia has never been found. The case doesn't feel like a mystery built around one dramatic clue. It feels like a locked door with several keys missing. The phone, the route, the man on CCTV, the private relationships, the missing rucksack, the silence of people police believe no more. And somewhere inside those pieces is the answer to what happened between Claudia's final evening at home and the morning shift she never reached. For Claudia's family, this was never just a case. It was the absence of a daughter, a sister, a person who should have come home, a person who should have grown older, a person who should have been more than a photograph in an appeal. Her father spent the rest of his life searching for answers. Her mother has lived with that same unanswered question. And the police still say it's never too late for someone to come forward. Because after all of these years, Claudia's disappearance may not need a miracle. It may need one person. One person who saw, who heard, who knows. One person who has stayed quiet for far too long. And until that changes, Claudia Lawrence remains missing. Her case remains unsolved. And the final confirmed picture of her life remains painfully ordinary. A woman finishing work, going home, speaking to her parents, getting ready for the next day, and then silence. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is William, and this is the Baker Street Bureau. If true crime, paranormal, and the outright unexplainable are your thing, you're in the right place. If you enjoyed today's video and you want to support my work, the best way you can do that is by hitting the like button. It lets YouTube know that you're happy with what you've just watched, and then they're more likely to show it to other people that may enjoy this kind of video. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down with me. And if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.